Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Candace. Thank you for tuning in. Today I wanted to talk to you about one of the jobs that I held that I enjoyed very much. To date, it was one of the best jobs that I've had. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I went to this position twice. It was the first managerial role that I had, and I wanted to go into details about that job. So the first title that I had when I held this position the first time, it was the manager of process improvement and compliance. And then when I went back to that role, it was the manager of clinical documentation and coding quality. So it was more so with a focus of CDI. So I want to talk about CDI and then what I did specifically in that role. So with my last organization, this role specifically was with the physician company side of the healthcare system that I was employed with. So the first time I was in this role, and I'm just going to read specifically exactly what I did, what my job functions were, things of that nature. So my role was to ensure that the AR services, accounts receivable, was compliant with all current and future changes in coding, billing, and documentation, all the rules and regulations that impact the current policies and procedures at that time. I managed a coding team and the operations to ensure accuracy with appropriate ICD-9 and ICD-10 coding guidelines and CPT guidelines across the network. Now, I mentioned ICD-9 because I held this position back in 2014. So at the time, I was responsible for implementing the ICD-10 coding change, which was huge for the nation if you were an HIM professional. So that was major. That was major for me. I was considered the ICD-10 project manager at the time I worked with my manager at the time on the hospital side, and then with the implementation. And then when I switched over to the physician company side, I was the go-to for making sure the implementation went smoothly for the physician company side. I provided leadership and employee documentation, routine evaluation measures, along with necessary recommendations to assigned and matrix reporting staff. So what that means when you have matrix reporting is I was responsible for I had two direct reports, two coding analysts that reported directly to me, but then there was a coding analyst that reported to another manager at the hospital. And so my goal or my role was to make sure that their operations, as far as their duties and everything, and their coding structure aligned with my coding structure for my team. So there was a dotted line or matrix reporting structure to me, but I wasn't over her as far as her HR and time card and things like that. But if there's any questions that she had as far as how to do something, her policies and procedures as far as it relates to coding and her auditing process and things like that, I was her go-to, and I was her support person. I was responsible for establishing standards and goals for coding and physician audit processes. I successfully created and implemented coding audits, compliance, and education programs related to Medicare and commercial payer processes. I successfully revamped the physician audit process in order to track and trend coding and documentation errors. And I was responsible for developing and maintaining current knowledge of the state of healthcare, or I didn't develop and maintain the current knowledge of the state of healthcare, but I was responsible for knowing the state of healthcare in regards to reimbursement, federal regulations, trends, and forecasting. And as far as healthcare management, health information management, you're always going to need to know what the state of healthcare is in regards to reimbursement, federal regulations, trends, and forecasting. That is a staple that you will need to know. So in my role as a manager of process improvement and compliance, that really is what kicked off my skills and my expertise in the physician audit processes and physician education on the physician company side of healthcare. And that's where I gained my manager experience. I only had 2 coding analysts that reported to me. And I stayed in that role for about 2.5 years. No, this says 1 year and 4 months. Yeah, I did not last that long in this role, for various reasons. I may talk about that in another video, but my manager in the role previous to this, she had moved in another position in the charge master role. She was the manager of charge master, and I followed her and went to the charge master department as a revenue analyst. And then that was a great move for me. Went back to the hospital side. And then when management changed for the good, the director at the time, this is the craziest thing. I ended up emailing the director some information for something. I don't remember what it was. And then he said, "Hey, are you interested in coming back?" And I was like, wow, they asked me to come back. So I came back, and when I went back to this same exact position, the title changed to Manager of Clinical Documentation and Coding Quality. So CDCQ, that's what I abbreviated it as. And at that time, I managed 5 coding analysts. So my team grew a little bit. And then there was more of a focus on CDI, Clinical Documentation Improvement, or Clinical Documentation Integrity. So I still manage the process of provider and coding audit reviews to ensure compliance with CMS, billing and documentation guidelines. At this time, the company had close to 900 providers. And then the goal was to, optimize the revenue for the organization while also staying in compliance. But also what I learned in that role, and I had a mentor. He still have that mentor by the name of Glenn Krause, and it's also putting the patient first. So while we want to find ways to optimize the revenue, we also want to make sure we're keeping the integrity of the chart first, number one, while also making sure that we're not overcoding or undercoding the encounter as well. So ensuring that all HIPAA standards are being followed, establishing standards and goals for coding and physician audit processes, providing education to billers and management, maintaining the current knowledge of the state of healthcare regarding reimbursement, federal regulations, trends, and forecasting for physician reimbursement, and Medicare Part B rules and regulations. So again, Part B is for the physician company side, the physician side of healthcare, because again, Part A would be for the hospital side. So again, this role I enjoyed very much because you get that one-on-one physician education with all of the providers. So when I say providers, I'm saying physicians, your advanced practice practitioners. So that includes your nurse practitioners, your physician assistants, your residents, fellows. You're providing that education to them. You're working with your Epic team to make sure the templates are correct, the documentation is correct. Because when you're working with Epic, your Epic team is setting up the documentation. They're setting up the templates, but they're setting up the templates based on the IT standards. They don't really know how to set up the templates based on documentation guidelines. So those two teams really work hand in hand. So when you're in the role of HIM, again, there's so many different areas that you can work in. I believe, and I commented this early. I commented this on a previous video in the comment section. I believe it was 40 different areas that an HIM professional could work in, with over 200 titles. Don't quote me on that. It's in a previous comment, but again, and then implementing change management processes into current workflows. So within the audit process and the documentation processes, looking to see where there can be improvement, whether you're in the clinic or in the hospital, looking to see where there are inefficiencies and how those can be improved. And then when we're working towards the CDI processes, seeing how we can establish an outpatient CDI program. So that's really what I want to get into as well. So clinical documentation improvement. AHIMA focuses on CDI. That's your American Health Information Management Association. And then you have ACDIS, which is your Association of Clinical Documentation Integrity Specialists. And you can have certifications in both organizations for CDI. I'm not very familiar with ACDIS. I'm more so familiar with AHIMA, but I do not have a specialty. I don't have a certification in CDI with either organization. I just worked in CDI, and in my previous role, I was trying to form my department into approaching our work from a CDI perspective. But my team did not have any type of certifications within CDI. So I just want to get that clear. So CDI, from AHIMA's definition, is the clinical documentation is the foundation of every health record in every setting. Clinical documentation is any manual or electronic notation made by a clinical care provider or their authorized medical scribe. So I'm reading that from AHIMA. That is AHIMA's definition of CDI. And then from ACDIS, clinical documentation integrity focuses on ensuring that the documentation in the health record accurately reflects the clinical picture of the complexity of the patient's condition and treatment provided. So for me, when I'm thinking about clinical documentation and coding quality, that was my number one goal, is to push that definition forward first and then work on optimizing revenue, because providers, they want to know, how can we optimize our revenue? What do I have to do to get to a level 4? What do I have to do to get to a level 5? Tell me what I need to document. Well, no, we don't want to look at it that way. We want to look at what was the patient seen for and how do you document that? Then we look at, okay, the patient was seen for this, what office visit level met that? Not, okay, well, this is what constitutes a level 5. Make sure you document up to that level. That's backwards. That's backwards thinking. But that's sometimes how providers think. So we want to change that frame of thinking and push the integrity of the record first. So in traditional CDI, it's always about improving organizational revenue, increasing quality outcome, and then workflows, which include chart reviews and query processes for providers. And my mentor, Glenn, he was pushing me to push away from provider queries, because that was the one thing that we always did. The quickest way to get to providers for us was through Epic messaging, because we did chart reviews on a pre-bill basis, meaning before the bill goes out the door, we're looking at the chart and we notice that something is wrong. So before it's even billed to the insurance company, message the provider to get the chart fixed. But we want to move away from queries and push out education first. So the query process is very redundant. So we want to push out that education so that providers can just get it right the first time, and we don't even have to query the provider. So the future of CDI means improving the integrity of the record, quality over quantity. Revenue accuracy, including denials management, that provider education, and then standardizing all of your templates to make sure you're hitting all the qualifications for your coding and your billing. Then you have your inpatient CDI and your outpatient CDI. Inpatient CDI is much more common. I feel like the industry is still working on outpatient CDI. Even at my current organization, I believe we're just now getting an outpatient CDI. It was about 2 months ago. We had an issue where from a clinical perspective, we needed something to be reviewed, and I sent emails out to about 3 or 4 different people, and it just kept going in a circle. I sent it to HIM. I'm asking, is there someone who can look at this from a CDI perspective? We only had someone available from an inpatient perspective on the hospital side. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Why don't we have these positions available on the outpatient side? And they just don't exist. So we're trying to get, meaning that the industry, I believe, is trying to get push outpatient CDI into the different settings, such as ED, observation, outpatient ambulatory settings, or ambulatory clinics rather, and push CDI to be geared more towards E&M services as well, not just focus on inpatient services. Your staff for a CDI program can include your HIM department. So that's where us HIM professionals are needed. Case management, obviously your providers, anyone within the revenue cycle, depending on how the health system or your hospital or the physician company or side is set up, that can vary. Your quality, and then your compliance department. All of those different areas can consist of your CDI program. So the goal of a CDI program would be to obtain clinical documentation that captures the patient's clinical information, to identify and clarify missing, conflicting, or non-specific provider documentation related to any diagnoses and procedures, support accurate diagnostic and procedural coding, DRG assignment that leads to appropriate reimbursement, promote health record completion during the patient's course of care, which then promotes patient safety, to improve communication between physicians and their healthcare and the other members of the healthcare team, provide awareness and education, improve documentation to reflect quality and outcome scores, and then improve coding professionals' clinical knowledge. Let's see here. I would say for me, when I was a manager in that department, the skills needed for or let me rephrase, when I was trying to build out my department and we were on the rise to hiring more people, and I had this certain vision in my head, what I was struggling with was CDI departments. If you look at the job outlook for those departments, you see that a lot of CDI departments are still hiring RNs. And that is just so disappointing, because I truly believe that HIM professionals are very capable of doing that job. They're very capable of running a CDI department. When I was on my job search, I was looking for roles of a director of CDI, but those positions are held by nurses. You have to have your coding certification plus your RN, most likely a BSN. And I just think that's very unfortunate. I definitely think that you have to have an interdisciplinary team. But in order to hold a high level position, I don't think it's required for you to be a nurse. Skills needed to become a CDI professional. You do have to be knowledgeable of reimbursement methodologies. You have to have coding. You have to have interpersonal skills, because you're going to be communicating with billing, with coding, with physicians, with your chief medical officers, with legal counsel, with denials management, with your nursing, with leadership. You're going to be communicating with a vast or with a majority of people at all different levels. You have to have leadership skills, organizational skills. You have to know how to audit. You have to be flexible, and you have to have communication. Per ACDIS, you have to have clinical expertise, and you have to have inpatient coding experience. That's where I disagree, only because I think the industry is trying to move into is trying to bring CDI into the outpatient world. And then again, if you have experience working these denials, and you have experience auditing, and you have experience working with physicians, your experience can go a long way. And if you have a multidisciplinary team, I think I might have said interdisciplinary team earlier. If you have a multidisciplinary team, you can have somebody from compliance, somebody that's an RN, somebody from coding, somebody from billing, possibly a PA. You can have either a committee or a separate CDI team or department on its own to complete these types of tasks to get the job done. But it doesn't necessarily need to be run by what am I trying to say? It doesn't need to be run by a clinical team, consulting with coding. I think it needs to be a collaborative effort. That's where I'm trying to get at. So with that said, going back to, my personal experience, and I'm just going off of, actually looking at my resume, because I figured, I would start going through the different jobs that I've had, because I've had several, and saying, okay, let me do a deep dive into, some of my favorite positions that I've had, to kind of open up your guys' eyes to other positions within HIM. And I can say that, working for CDI, not working for CDI, but working in the world of CDI, having my mentor give me great perspectives on CDI has been very beneficial. And that's something that I would love to dive back into. And it's another reason why I continue to teach, because I'm still in it. I'm not in it so much in my current role because I'm not actually teaching the physicians how to document, and I'm not totally engrossed in compliance, but I am able to still remind the physicians about Medicare rules and regulations, and what the rules are as far as, incident 2 guidelines and what's needed to document when you're working with a resident, or what the attestations are for telehealth and things like that. So I'm not deep into it. I still have my hands wet, but doing these types of look backs helps me go into it, and I'm able to answer questions for you guys. So that's just a little summary on that, on CDI. And if you have any questions about the auditing, I didn't go much into the auditing, but if you want me to do a separate video on that, I can. And feel free to leave your questions below, and thank you for watching.